Okay. Calling to order the special meeting of the Board of Education for August 1st, 2024. Roll call.
Adina Hoover. Hi. We hear her.
Can she say that?
Here.
Oh,
there we go.
Yay.
Whitney Rogers.
Here.
Jessica Radonio.
Here.
Carlos Avia.
Here.
Angela Steckity. Kevin Marin.
Here.
Leah Conover.
Here. Okay, stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, do we have any public comment? Okay. Moving into personnel recommendations or the consent agenda to approve the personnel recommendations as presented.
So moved.
I have to say them.
Okay.
I have to say them, yeah. Jonathan Ruth, special education teacher, Westmont Junior High School.
Who seconded?
I thought I had to say it first.
Okay.
Yeah. Kwai Che Chan, teaching assistant. Natalie Pinsky, teaching assistant. Delaney Fisher, teaching assistant. Sandy Serwaka, teaching assistant. Adam McDaniels, freshman, sophomore boys soccer coach. Elise Oxus, yeah. Flags coach, Westmont High School. And Ellen Cyberlick, freshman, sophomore volleyball coach, Westmont High School. And resignations as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Ms. Rogers.
Yes.
Mr. Marin.
Yes.
Ms. Conover.
Yes.
Ms. Radonio.
Yes.
Ms. Steckity.
Yes.
Mr. Avia.
Yes.
Ms. Hoover.
Okay, moving into our discussion and information. Presentation from E.O. Sullivan on our community engagement sessions and survey data review.
I'll start by just saying thank you, and I probably just need to get this up towards my mouth a little bit. Thank you for having us out. It's been a whirlwind. We've been gathering a lot of information from the community, and it's been a really good process. We've got a lot of good data to share with you all as you've got some decisions certainly to make, both this evening and moving forward. I want to start though with just thanking your staff. We work with a lot of districts, and one thing that really stood out from your team throughout this process is just how open and collaborative they truly are. I don't want to name names, but we have some districts that say that they want feedback but aren't actually as open to it. They already know what they want. Your staff has been completely open and really wanting to hear from the community, and certainly the community knows that and has felt positively towards that. So we wanted to give them kudos for that. I'm going to go through the report. I just want to explain all the different things you have so you kind of know what it is you're looking at. We're going to spend most of our time today with the report, the written report, but there are a few data points that are also provided supplementally. You've got the phone survey data, and you've got some of the feedback. I just want to explain what those are, so as you're looking at it, you know what you're looking at. So if you look at the phone survey on the left-hand side, what you'll see is demographic information. This is just so you can see that the phone survey is accurately representative of your community. And so that's why that data is provided. And we'll go through what all of this means in a second. I'm just giving you an overview now. If you look on the right-hand side, that would be this data here. On the upper portion of that is the individual projects. If you'll remember, we tested 10 different projects or types of projects for the community to review and consider. And so if you look at the data from left to right, it shows how much people supported or opposed each of those projects individually. We asked them one by one. And then at the end of that section, we then ask people to rank all of the projects. And so if you look at the right-hand side to the right of that red column, that is a separate question where we ask people to rank the projects. So it's 11 questions for those 10 projects. Same as you move down. Same for the infrastructure solutions. We ask people for their feelings towards each individually. And then again at the end, we ask them to rank them. Same again with the funding levels. We asked people's opinions towards each individually, and then we said, which is your favorite? So as you're looking at those results, that's how we would tend to look at it. I would point to that far right column. That is the most important column. The ranking is the most important data that we'll look at in the phone survey, simply because it creates a sense of scarcity. If you say, hey, would you like new outdoor spaces or new classrooms? Few people are going to say no to that. When you say, hey, now pick between these 10 items and choose your favorite, well, now there's scarcity. They can only pick one of those as their favorite. So that's why we always point to the ranking data is the most important of that, because now we've asked people to pick and choose. I'll come back to what all of this means. Just again, I want to explain what you're looking at. Next, I'll point to these forms. As you'll see, there's 2 pages for this. These are the feedback forms or the responses from the other 2 groups, the phone surveys to the general public. We also had a community committee, which we had several meetings where we talked through a lot of what we're going to talk through today. They had a chance to answer questions, get a lot more information, and then they gave us their feedback on the exact same things that the public did. That's what you're going to see on the left-hand side is that ranking. Same idea, the same 10 projects, the same 3 infrastructure solutions, and the same funding level options. On the right-hand side, that's the feedback from the public who attended our public engagement sessions. Those are going to be your more passionate individuals. They found a babysitter and took time to come out, or they joined us on Zoom. So those tend to be your more passionate individuals. I'll explain what it all means. I just wanted to make sure everyone was following what you're looking at. With that, I want to go through the report. There's a few key things in the first few pages we'll talk about, but we're really going to get into the meat after that point. So on page 1, I just want to point to 2 key things. One is the overall level of feedback from the community. To date, we've gotten 471 responses from the community in this process. A really solid number, especially because this is a geographically fairly compact district. So we're not looking for massive numbers. We've got some districts that are huge and they might have more than this. We're very happy with 471 here. It's a good level of engagement from the public, and they've definitely wanted to make sure their voices are heard. So we're very happy to see that. Next thing I'll point to is just the feedback we got during phase 2. That's the end of the 3rd paragraph there. You'll see we got 101 responses during our engagement sessions and in the online feedback. We also got 278 phone survey responses. So we're looking at really good levels of data as we go through this today. The second page is just giving you details on what was done, the messaging that was used, how many meetings were held, how many opportunities people had to give their feedback. I will just summarize for time and simply say we gave people plenty of opportunities to have their voices heard, whether by taking a phone survey from their house, jumping on a Zoom, coming out to a meeting. People had opportunities to come out and have their voices heard. If they chose not to, of course, that's their right, but no one could say in the community we didn't have a chance, if not many chances, to come out and give our feedback. That's always what we like to see. And we got a lot of feedback from people who did participate saying, this is great, thank you. We had opportunities to do so. So we're very happy with that. With that, I want to call your attention to page 3. We're going to talk about the analysis because that brings all of this data together. At the end, as I open up to questions, if you have questions on individual data points, I'm happy to go into it. Here, what I'm going to do is bring it all together. Remember, we gathered data from 3 different groups, and so just to make this easier to digest, in our analysis, we pull it all together into one larger analysis of what it all means, and that's what I want to walk you through today. The first thing I want to draw your attention to is going to be in that phone survey. The first thing that we test is going to be this question right here. You'll see it on screen. It's kind of in the middle towards the bottom portion, the CUSD 201 opinion. That's really important because the favorability or lack thereof of a school district is going to dictate how well a potential referendum is going to do at the ballot box. And so we always want to see a really high number or a really solid number for favorability for the district. What we saw with your favorability numbers are that 78% rate your district favorably, only 16% rate your district unfavorably. We always will say, what's the net number? The net means you take the favorable, you subtract the unfavorable. What you're left with is your net number. Your net number here in this district is plus 63%. For context, because we do this for a lot of districts, that is a really good number. In the 60s is very good. It's really what we like to see. The highest we ever see, 72, 73, 74 is the highest we've ever seen. So when I look at plus 63, that is very, very good. And it means the community is very favorable to the district and they're favorable to the work you all have done.
On a continuum. So I'm sad we don't have the highest number, but we'll get to that later.
Next time, Jack.
So how good is it? I mean, you're saying it's good, but I mean, is it the top 10%, top 20%, top 30%?
40%, top half, how good is it?
Of the districts that we've tested in the last, let's say, 2 to 4 years, I put it in the top 10 to 15% of districts that we've looked at. It's definitely in the upper echelon. It's really, really good. We've only had 2 or 3 districts get above 70. Most of them that we say are very good are going to be in the 60s. Districts that we've seen in the 50s have gone forward with referendum and still done very well. It's in the 40s or below that we start to be concerned that maybe we can't move forward with a potential referendum. So when I say very good, it's definitely very good.
So top 10 to 15% of districts that are getting this kind of feedback?
Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you so much.
One thing I'll point to, I should have said, any questions you have as I go, please feel free to interrupt. I have a 4-month-old at home, so I'm used to never being able to finish sentences, so it's okay. The thing I want to point to, just in case you're a math nerd like some of the people on my team, if you did the math yourself, you might have come to a number that was 1% different than the net number. That's simply because we use whole numbers on screen. So those results are whole numbers. Once I bring it together, the rounding may make it look like it's off 1%. So in the analysis is the accurate, full, exact number, just so you're aware. All right, so the next thing we tested are the individual projects. This is where we tested the 10 things or 10 aspects that the district could move forward. The major goal here was to learn what's a priority from the community, what may be less of a priority for the community, and let's walk through that data together. The first thing I'll point to is that 8 of the 10 projects all had that net number was significantly positive. As a matter of fact, they had at least plus 29% for those 8 numbers. What I'll point to, again for context, looking at other districts, they will often have 1, 2, 3, sometimes even 4 projects that are negative, and usually significantly negative. Negative 20s, negative teens. The fact that you had 2 that were right on the edge and 8 that were tremendously positive, again, is an overall sign of positivity that we like to point to as this is a good sign the community is reacting very well to this process. I want to point to the order, if we were to prioritize based on all the feedback that we received. Top 2 were very clearly infrastructure and mechanicals, and safety and security. Both had extremely high favorability. You see the net numbers there, plus 56 and plus 62. The general public listed infrastructure and mechanicals as their #1 priority. The community committee and those who provided feedback to the public engagement also agreed. Safety and security was second for the general public and the committee. So again, those 2, every metric we looked at, those 2 stood above the rest as the community's top priorities. After that was classrooms, which was the second priority for those who attended the public engagement sessions, and third from the general public and the community committee. And so that in our overall ranking would come in third. Next is science labs. That was 4th. And then athletic facilities would come after that. So those would be the next 2 in priority. After that, you have 2 projects that were strongly supported. They would just come in below those top priorities, which is student support spaces and parking lots. The next 2 did drop a bit in priority, so they wouldn't be first things you might address, but they do still show a lot of signs of positivity. You've got collaborative and open spaces with the general public put at 5th, so that was pretty strong. And then you've got outdoor spaces, which was solidly positive, just not a big priority. So people said, yes, we like that, just maybe not over some other things. Finally, you have the pool, which was one of those that had a net negative favorability number, only -4, which isn't awful, but clearly this was the last priority from the public. It's pretty clear based on the data. At the end of this, I'll talk about what all of this means. I'm just kind of walking you through what the data is, and then we'll talk about what it means. Next, we'll go through the infrastructure solutions. So as you guys know, we tested 3 potential solutions as to how we could move forward. Those 3 were simply doing renovations, doing additions and renovations, or doing a new school and renovations. Those were the 3 infrastructure solutions that we tested. All 3 of them received favorable rankings from the public. So again, another sign of positivity, which we like to see. The top choice from the community was the new school plus renovation solution. It was ranked highest by the community committee and the public engagement attendees, and it was a close second from the general public. The second, if you were to rank these as we're moving forward, the second would have been simply doing renovation. This was the highest choice by the general public, but it should be noted it was third amongst the community committee, and it was third amongst the attendees of the public engagement sessions. Then finally would have been additions plus renovation. That would come in third, looking at the infrastructure solutions. Last section we'll look at is the potential funding levels. As you know, we tested 3 different funding levels, a low, a medium, and a high. And there's a few things I want to point to specifically within that data. First, another sign of positivity. 72% of the general public chose one of those options. Only 21% chose no additional funding whatsoever. So that's another sign of positivity that a significant majority of the public said, yes, we do recognize there are needs and we're willing to invest in those needs. Only 21% said absolutely not. The other thing we look at is the overall range of those funding levels. So one of the things that we look at within all the data to know is our overall range okay, or are we maybe too low or maybe too high? What we do see is based on some of the negative feedback at the high funding level, the overall range is above the community's comfort if you just look at the range in general. That high number, as you'll see in a second, was really tough for the community. Even medium is a little bit on that edge. And so we're going to talk about what that means, but that overall range that we started with is a bit above where the community is going to be comfortable with if we do move forward. When we look at ranking those within sort of how does the feedback in the specific funding levels, what we saw is that the community committee and public engagement attendees, those are the people who are most engaged with the district, they favor the high funding level. That was their choice. The general public chose high as second, not as first amongst them. However, it should be pointed to the net favorability of that high is -28. It's a rough number, especially with 61% opposing it and 46% strongly opposing it. And so that high funding
What
level.
was the strongly opposing again?
46% who strongly opposed it. And so that high funding level is just going to be really, really tough. If you want to move forward in November, we're not comfortable saying that something at that high funding level would be successful. The low funding level was ranked first by the general public. It also had the highest favorability at +14. However, everything here in the funding side is going to be a little bit of a mixed bag. That was ranked last by the community committee and the public engagement attendees. So that wasn't their top choice, but in the phone survey, it was the public's top choice. Then last would have been that medium funding level. It was ranked second by the community committee and the public engagement attendees. It was ranked third by the general public. The feedback in the first two sections is really clear, and the funding levels is a little bit less clear, which is why during the analysis I'll walk you through what this all means and what we're recommending. Before I do that, any questions on the data itself before I talk about what this means and what we're recommending for next steps? And it's a lot, so you might have to take a second to digest. Let me talk about what it means and what we're recommending here for next steps. So first, we point to that this was a very positive process. I've had to stand at board meetings in the last several months for some clients and say it wasn't, and unfortunately, guys, you're going to need to shut this down or slow this down. So I sometimes have to be the bringer of bad news, and today I don't have to be that person, which is exciting. The overall process was very positive. The feedback was very positive. That's a great sign and what we like to see. One of the first questions, of course, we have to answer is how quickly do we or don't we move in this process? We have an election coming up in November. There's another one in April. Do we speed up? Do we slow down? That's, of course, one of the key questions we're going to try to answer today. This is going to be dependent on a number of factors. What we saw in the overall data was a lot of favorability, a lot of positivity, but concerns about cost, as you saw in that funding level. And so what we want to point to are a couple things. That the public is clearly recognizing the needs that exist, especially with the elementary schools and how old they are. We heard that over and over and over, that the public recognizes that's a significant challenge. It's just the tax impact, especially at the higher levels, that they're concerned about. They do prefer the long-term solution, rather than the short term, which is why the new school building took such a high favorability and was the top choice. Again, but that cost is what concerned them. They do favor a number of the projects tested in this phase, but it was clear they really favored the nuts and bolts. The reason I point to that is in most districts, I will say if you just move forward with one thing or two things, that's not going to be enough. The community wants more. Your community is very clearly understanding the need, and they would be okay if you move forward with just a few things, whether that be just the new school or just specific renovations. Many districts want to see 6 or 7 things in terms of the residents. That was unique here. We didn't see that here. It really was a lot of the nuts and bolts that took the top spot, meaning they're not looking necessarily for shiny objects. They want schools that are safe. They want schools that are not costing you extra to maintain because they're so significantly old. That really is the top priority. If you accomplish that, they'll be very happy. And so that's what we really cover in that paragraph if you're following through this. And so what we recommend, if you go to the last 2 paragraphs of next steps, is what you should do moving forward. The first step is to confer, which I know they're here, our architects, our construction experts. Obviously, we're just giving you data from the community. They're the real experts on what can we do or what can't we do, but really identifying the most cost-effective way to achieve that new school. The public would like to see the new school. They recognize the benefits of that. It's just the cost that scares them. If we possibly can get the cost under 70 million, which is just us saying this, I know that may not be possible or is not possible, but just looking at the data, that 70 million is kind of the breaking point, where past that point, we might be a little tougher to succeed with the referendum at the ballot box. Keep moving through this. So the new school is their top priority, and if they can get some improvements at the junior high and high school, like infrastructure, mechanicals, safety, security, classrooms, science labs, maybe athletic facilities, they would take that as the cherry on top, but it's not absolutely necessary for the community. If this can't be achieved, if you can't get this done around or under that number, then you have to decide what you may want to do. To move forward in November, you may have to decide, do you want to go with something scaled down in order to move faster? If you'd like to have the new school and it's going to be above the price point the community is comfortable with, we do have options. We can certainly try for November, knowing it might be a little tougher because April is only 5 months later. Or you could look to, do we take time to educate the public and then decide to move forward? What we have seen is that if you run educational efforts with the public, show them what the needs are, explain to them why it's a need, you do see these numbers, they would possibly improve. It's not going to happen as quickly as November. That's too short of a timetable. But if you take 6, 12, 18 months, you can move these numbers more positively, more favorable. And so it's not to say you have to go for something a little bit more scaled back. If you want to go for more, you would simply have to determine, is that worth possibly slowing down and waiting? Of course, that's not for us to decide. Just it's the balance, of course, that we have to look at as we're starting to make decisions here. I will finally stop passing so much information that I bury you and open it up to questions, discussion, etc.
Okay, so before we start discussing, I just want to make a note. We are taking no action on this tonight. There's no action whatsoever during this board meeting. We have a committee meeting scheduled prior to our next board meeting on August 13th? On August 13th at 5:30, when we will be discussing in more detail and coming back, and we will potentially be taking action at that meeting. So just so that everybody's very clear, anybody who's watching at home knows there is no action being taken tonight.
Thank you, Matt.
No questions, apparently.
There's a lot
Right
to
on.
digest. This is phase 2 of our process, and it's always the most intense. There's so much discussion, so much data, so it's normal for it to take a minute to digest.
Are we likely to get more turnout with the presidential election to help the referendum pass, or does it not matter if we wait?
Turnout's going to impact for sure. What I will say is, because you're looking at nuts and bolts, specifically, there aren't as many of those shiny objects. In April elections, those infrastructure and safety-related referendums do better than others. And so I have had to say to some districts, you guys, April's not possible for you. That's not the case with your district. You could look to April. As just elections go in general, November will be more favorable. So there is certainly a reason to consider November. You'll see higher turnout, and we do like that, not just for a more favorable environment, but now more voices will be heard in the process. You'll see turnout anywhere between 50 and 70% in November, whereas April, it could be as low as 10 to 15. And so just moving forward in an election where more voices from your community will be heard, that is a mark for why November should be seriously considered. But the good news is April isn't out of the realm of possibility. If you did move forward in April, because it does tend to be an older and more conservative electorate that really only care about nuts and bolts and safety, some of the other things may have to be pared back if you did decide to go in April.
And as far as the feedback, do you have a breakdown, and maybe I missed it, between, school families and then non-school families? You know,
Yeah,
what
so-
kind of feedback we got?
Yeah, and we dive really deep into a lot of that data. If you think we dumped a lot on you today, understand that we looked at all that, and that's another 30 or 40 pages of data that we go through to make our analysis and recommendation. And so if you look at the demographic data on this left-hand side, all the data, we've looked at it broken down by all the different demographics, whether it's age, gender,
Okay, I
ethnicity, ideology, and connection. And so what you see is the data we're looking at in the phone survey is 61% not from people who are currently having kids currently in the school. So that's really well reflected in the phone survey itself.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you.
Can you speak a little bit to the demographics of the phone survey, just to, because seeing them, I think it very clearly looks like a pretty well-balanced phone survey, but can you speak to that in public?
Yeah, so the important thing with the phone survey, we call it the scientific phone survey, and that scientific word is important in that the data gets, it's called weighting and modeling. You've got data experts who do this, who are way smarter than me, who do this for every phone survey to make sure that we're accurately reflecting your community. What you don't want to have happen is, let's say we put out the calls at a certain time where more men are home than women, or more seniors than young families, or whatever it might be. Well, then you've got a phone survey that's got a skew because it's reflecting just who happened to pick up the phone that day. That's why we call all throughout the week. That's why we call it different times of the day. We let people call into it. We're really making sure we're getting a wide snapshot of the community, that no one is getting, having their voice heard more than maybe their neighbors or anybody else. And so that's why we really key in on those demographics to make sure that what we're looking at here is scientific. It's accurate for this community. And so that's why we include the data, and that's why it's so important to make sure it reflects your community, and it does.
Yeah, and I think for anybody who maybe hasn't dove into this or for whatever reason, just to call out, like, roughly 33% was over 44. Roughly 34% was from 45 to 64 in age. Roughly 33% was 65 and older. Same for ideology, conservative, moderate, liberal. Same for their connection to CUSD, current, previous, and none. All of that was right around the 30% mark. And then gender, 50% mark. Like, seeing those pieces is, I think, impactful, because I think you tend to be like, oh, you only get the people who answered the phone, and that is not what this survey was.
Well, and I think the other point that's all accurate, I think the other point I'd make to add to that is that's why we capture data in 3 different ways, right? Because anybody who gave us feedback in the community committee, you guys have an excellent committee of people really in tune with the community. They've all got different opinions, but they're also more tied to the schools. They're more aware of what's going on. The people who attend the engagement sessions, they're really passionate, a lot of parents. So we separate that data on purpose, because you can kind of see then a 3D picture of how your community feels. And what you're going to see is in the phone survey, that's going to tend to be your more conservative audience on spending and on value, on what they want to get, what value they want to get for that dollar. Your committee tends to be more in favor of maybe spending a little bit more and getting a little bit more value. So we always look at the full picture when we're making our analysis, because when you do decide, or if you do decide to go forward with a referendum, the people who make this decision, who vote at the ballot box, it's going to be this breakdown. Those are the people who are showing up. And so one thing we pride ourselves on in this process is making sure that our data we present to you is your community, the people who would and could vote when they have the opportunity to do so.
You've done this type of survey, this approach to the data gathering, I'm sure, at least similar or the exact same way across school districts, is that right?
Correct, yes.
What do you know from a historic standpoint of the correlation between these opinion numbers and outcomes at the polls for a referendum? Can you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so you're going to see, again, another reason why we do kind of the 3D picture is the final result. Let's say if you were to move forward with something and put it on the ballot box or on the ballots for November, your final result will be better than what you see in the phone survey, and maybe a little below what you see in the community committee feedback. It's going to be somewhere between those two. Why I say that is your general public right now, we purposely got feedback from them with giving them very, very little information. We wanted to know, how do you stand today knowing very little? I mean, the phone survey script, if anyone took it, it does give a little info, but it's 5 minutes of information, not an hour of information. And so over the next few months, should you decide to move forward with the referendum, there'll be an effort to make sure the public knows what it is that's on the ballot. What's the value here? What's the benefit? What's the cost? The taxpayer impact will be shared with everyone. We'll have a calendar on the website where people can figure out exactly what this impact will be for them, not just the average for everybody. So when they go to the ballot box, they're going to be more informed as to what it is they're voting on. And so the numbers you see in the phone survey, from our experience, the performance of a potential referendum will be higher than what's in the phone survey. It won't achieve the high levels that you see in the committee. Those are your most favorable, but it will get closer to those numbers. And so that's why when we're looking at a recommendation, that's why we find that sweet spot of where, in our experience, we tend to see that if you're in this range, as things get better between now and November, this will result in a positive outcome.
I'm going to try and pin you down a little bit more if you don't mind. What I'm asking specifically is favorable and somewhat favorable are 78%, right? Did I do that math?
Which one are we looking at? I'm sorry.
I'm looking at the summarized results that I have in front of me.
Oh, I know. I'm sorry. Which result in that?
The opinions.
The opinion of the
Specifically, the box marked CUSD 201.
Oh, of the district.
Opinions. That's what I was asking about.
Got
Like,
it.
the correlation between those results and what we are likely to see at the ballot box,
Got it.
given on referendum day, whatever day that is. Obviously, if we're going to take longer to put this on referendum, we would want to improve those numbers over time. That would probably be the metric I think we would be looking at to improve. And so my question is, if right now we're at 78% favorable or somewhat favorable, do you have any data where you can show a correlation between 78% favorable and actual ballot results on a referendum?
Yeah, now that I understand the question,
Yeah.
I haven't gotten this question before. It's a good question. I can't say that I can point to an exact percentage. We look at the range. Again, I want to see it in the upper 50s, into the 60s, or even as high as the 70s, in order to say, yes, go forward to a referendum.
net.
You have that net number. And so that's always the net I'm always looking at, because you got to subtract the opposition. And so you're in that range. The question is, if we were to raise it, what would that do to the ballot box? The problem is, or to the referendum, the problem is, can you raise it? You guys obviously have done the best you can with what you're facing, but the overall favorability of the district is tied to, there's some unfavorability towards those schools, so the reason we're here. So the question is, are you capped? If you spent a year or two trying to raise this number and we pull it, would it go up? I can't predict that it actually would, because some of that favorability is tied to the schools that they're sending their kids to, or the schools they drive past. And so the question I'd have, which it's anecdotal, I don't know, is, can you really raise this number any further? Usually the districts that we see up in the 70s, they've got new facilities, they've got new programs, people are really excited, really happy. I don't know how much you could raise this in the facilities that you're stuck working with today. And so, if you take the time to raise that number, maybe you could raise it a point or two, maybe 3. That's not going to have a significant impact on what a referendum would or wouldn't do at the ballot box. What would have an impact is not necessarily spending that time raising your favorability, because this is a very good number. I would spend that time educating the public on why we're talking about these problems. Not to say you haven't already, I'm sure you have, but if you were to take time, it would really be about, hey, listen, we could go forward with just renovations if that's really what you want to do. However, here's what that means. That means our costs keep going up. That means the infrastructure mechanicals that you want to see new, these things are going to keep breaking down. Is this really the most fiscally responsible path forward? That's where I'd spend my time versus spending it on trying to raise the favorability of the district.
Thank you.
Is there a window to try for a referendum possibly? Is there outside factors that would influence, the economy and whatnot? Should we, seems like the economy's okay right now. Should we try now or that's?
There's a number of outside factors, so it's a great question. First being, you just don't know what the world's going to look like tomorrow, and every day that passes that, it raises that risk. We were just talking about one of our clients was steaming towards a referendum, and then the assessments came out, and you've all read the news, and they were one of the communities that were hit the hardest, and now they have to stop because they got blasted. And so you don't know if that could happen. Could the economy get worse? We just don't know. And I'm sure our architects and construction experts will tell us that with inflation and other cost increase, every day you wait, let alone every year you wait, the same projects will cost more. So there's a lot of factors outside of just this data that absolutely will come into play. So it's, in general, that alone, if you're just looking at that and nothing else, you want to move quicker, not slower. Because time is never your friend, or is very rarely your friend when it comes to that. It's the risk that things could get worse is higher than the chance it could get better.
Right. Thanks.
What's the difference, and maybe this is for our architects, what is the difference between November and April as it relates to like a potential start of construction? And is there one? Is there potential for us to start construction next year, next summer?
On a new facility, no, it would take us longer than that to design a facility.
Regardless of November or April?
Well, there might be the possibility to do site work or start like preparations in the summer. So we could finish designing the building while that initial infrastructure work is being laid. So if there's site work or underground utility work, that might be able to happen in the summer as a preparation for the actual building construction.
Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, you're gonna need to go up there. Sorry. Our great voice in the sky can't hear you if you're not talking into a microphone.
So the question was to, how does it impact construction, the start of construction, whether it's November or April? So to design a facility as large as we're talking about, potentially 80 to 90,000 square feet would take us 6 to 8 months. And then the bidding and vetting of all the contractors would take another 8. So just in round numbers, we usually say it's a year. It could be a little less than that. But there's things that need to be done before the new construction can start. We have to get utilities to the site. We have to deal with stormwater management, and typically those things have to be done before the building construction can start. So we could do early release packages to get that type of infrastructure work going while we're finishing the design work. So in theory, some of that underground infrastructure work could happen in the summer while we're finishing up the rest of the project.
But it's also potentially not as impactful if we go for a new building as opposed to a renovation. Because a renovation, we're more tied to the school year.
Correct. Right, so then we're focusing on that 10 weeks in the summer.
Yeah.
And the earlier we can get out to bid, the better. So if ideally, we want to be awarding construction contracts in December for the following summer. So then that just would lengthen that time.
I guess maybe some of this is reiteration as far as what work can be done as far as the time difference. And from November, going for a referendum in November versus going to a referendum in April, as far as like what type of, you spoke this a little bit, I just want to reiterate it, I guess, a little bit, like what can be done in that process, or in that time work, the time frame?
Are you asking in terms of the type of renovation projects that could happen within the existing building?
No, I'm sorry. I'm going back to just preparation for referendum and education, I guess, for the public. So that type of work that we do with the community in education, the education process.
And you're asking what could be done, or when would it be done?
So what can be done in that time frame?
Yeah.
As we talk about educating the public, are we working more on explaining the funding levels? Are we working more so on figuring out what type of work we need to do as far as renovation versus new schools? What can we do in that time frame if we like decide on April as the better choice?
Sure. So I'll answer holistically, and then if I miss the answer to what you're looking for, certainly feel free to call me out on it. So an educational program explaining, so if you were to say, let's take a pause, let's go out to the public and let's see, how we can improve these numbers, we would do similar to what we did during phase 2, where we would have town halls, we would do tours, maybe do some videos of the facilities, take some photos, get that information out to the public so they can see, because you can see the difference in opinions between the phone survey and the community committee. The people who saw it, who experienced it, who felt it, who touched it, certainly could tell the difference. The challenge with that is one of time. I can't predict how long that will take. I have seen educational programs take up to 2 years because you can't force people to come out. I know as you guys have done tours and things in the past, you might get 5 or 10 people out. 5 or 10 people isn't going to change these numbers. So how many times do we need to go back and do the tours, engage the public? Sure, it could be done in as short as 3 or 4 months. Most of the time, though, it takes over 6 months. And so if we do decide to say, let's delay and let's engage the public, my only concern with that is I can't guarantee you'll be ready by April of 2025. You might then be looking at March or November of 2026 before the public truly is ready by that point.
The other thing we could do is actually start planning the new building. Like, we can have programming sessions, we can have community engagement sessions to identify what the goals and priorities are for new construction and start to whet the appetite of the community for what a new building could be that's customized for your community, and then compare it to the existing facilities. So we could start that engagement process and start, coming up with floor plans and massings of the building so that there's a visual image to go with the sales pitch.
But what's the cost benefit of the change in election cycle from what is now potentially probably going to be a pretty high turnout November election versus in April?
In a vacuum, typically you can put forward a more comprehensive plan in the November election than you can in an April election. And so if you do say, hey, let's look to April, as I mentioned before, it may have to be a little bit scaled down even from what you might consider today, just because, again, your April electorate is looking for something a little bit different. And so by saying, no, we don't want to go forward in November, which is obviously an option available to you, you do open the risk that either if you do go forward in April, it might be less than what we're talking about today, or you're simply having to wait then all the way until 2026 before you could move forward with something. There is definitely that risk.
Yeah, which the reason for going in April would be, could we engage the community more and could we get the higher number or a higher number?
Yeah, so it does put you in a situation where if you wait in order to engage the public to be able to go for a more comprehensive solution, that risk is high, that I don't know if I can predict that you for sure would be ready by April. So I don't know that you're choosing today between November and April. You're choosing between November and maybe April, possibly 2026. It's just
what's the March election in 26?
That would be the general primary for the gubernatorial election, which is
the lowest turnout election.
It's higher turnout than April. It generally gets 30 to 50%. But that's the problem with primaries. For many of our clients, we tend to recommend staying away from primaries simply because they're very volatile. A primary election is just that. It's a nomination process for the two parties. And so the people who show up in a primary election are just going to be those, I'm going to use some partisan terms because we're talking about a primary, those really strong Republicans and really strong Democrats. And so you have, generally in that March election, it's a pretty volatile electorate. So sometimes that's just an impediment you can't get across, which means you're waiting until the November election of 2026. So this timeline gets lengthened out a bit, and there's factors we just can't predict. A March 2026 election is going to be entirely dependent on who runs. Again, I'm going to get political, but I have to explain my answer. Who knows if Governor Pritzker runs again or doesn't? If he doesn't, that creates a Democratic primary. Are there going to be Republican candidates on their side? And so turnout in an election like that is entirely dependent on things none of us can control. And that's the risk you take, is we just don't know what those factors are until a year from now. And is that too late then to make a decision? So the March election is always a very risky one to look at.
And then we've also added potentially 2 years of inflation
Correct.
Under the cost. So waiting 2 years, doing more education 2 years so that we could potentially get that higher number, and yet the higher number might
Gets us less.
effectively be the same number as today.
Correct.
Due
You
to
might get as
inflation.
much as you're getting today, but paying that much more in 2 years. That's
So
certainly a
we've spent
possibility.
2 years maintaining.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are districts, and again, just giving you options to consider, there are districts that say, okay, then knowing we have 2 bites at this apple, and knowing if we go in April, it will have to be a pared down option, do we try for something that we think is a reasonable consensus plan in November, and if it doesn't succeed, then we could go for a pared down option in April? I mean, that's certainly something you could look at. Generally, the challenge with that is if you're looking at a potential loss, usually you have to go downward from a loss, not upward. So you do kind of create a ceiling for yourself.
What type of election is this April 2025?
That's a consolidated, so a local election. So on that ballot for voters is going to be school board members, it's going to be mayors, township trustees, township supervisors, library boards, park districts, all the local elections. That's what that election is.
So it's not as partisan, you're saying?
Yeah, the April electorate isn't going to be partisan. It's nonpartisan races. So it's, for that,
No, but it's small. We got about 10% in the last.
turnout is very, very low.
About
And
10%.
when you
And
get to
doesn't it
turnout
have-
that low, the people who tend to show up are going to be more seniors, they're not going to be younger families that typically show up.
There's an age skew, right?
Yeah, they're.
But that's if we do nothing and say nothing, right? But if we go out and like emphasize the importance of it.
Yeah.
Campaign, if you will.
Yeah.
I know we can't, like, yeah, you know, but that's if we do nothing.
So, I mean, the last election was pretty loud, the last municipal election, and we still were only at, I think, maybe 11%.
But I think the key, the point you're making is a very good one,
Yeah.
which is on a lower turnout election, if you get your people to the polls, that certainly does have an impact. So if teachers and parents and everyone show up to the polls in those April elections, that certainly can make a difference. But it just has to happen, because in those elections, it all really hinges on that. And so if you're not able to get parents out and teachers out and people tied to the schools out to the polls, it very quickly can go the opposite direction.
Can you review the funding levels again, what those were?
Yeah.
Medium, low?
Yes, let me pull that up. Just give me 1 second. I don't want to say anything wrong unless you have it ready, Rich.
And then there's a second part to that question after that.
Okay. Do you have? So the three funding levels were 55 million for the low, 70 for the medium, and then 90 for the high. We also tested the tax impacts, or we gave the public those tax impact numbers of what those each meant.
Oh, great, okay, so when you say like, if we win in April, we would have to maybe scale back a little bit, or scale back from which of those? From the
So-
90 or from the 70, or?
Yeah, I'll put myself, obviously, again, your architecture, construction team will tell you what's possible. I'm just going to point to the data we have. In that range of 70 is where we're safest right now, and ideally, a little bit below that 70 is where we say if you go forward in November, this has really good chances of succeeding. So I'll just say 70 for the sake of that's kind of where we're looking at for possible November. If you're looking at April, that could be a really high cap. You may have to bring it down closer to that 55. It could probably be in the low 60s to 60, but 70 might be the highest possible. It's certainly not going to go higher than that.
Okay.
I want the board to ask other questions, but I want to push back a little bit on that when the time is right.
Okay. You said you had was that the second question you had?
Yes,
Okay.
I think, yeah.
Just want to be sure I got
I'm
to
good
it.
for now, thank you.
So essentially, we have a public that is supportive of all of the work that is going to cost $90 million. Is only willing to give us
That's well
70
put.
Yeah, which is
for that work.
which is what we're seeing with voters across the board. They want the
Yep.
benefits, don't want to pay for it. It's pretty common. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
However, in that $20 million is health safety at other buildings, correct? It is parking lots at other buildings, it is roofs at other buildings, it is not. The only parts of that are optional are like building a field house on top of the pool, right? That's an optional. The lab spaces are optional-ish, not really, but they're optional-ish, right?
That could be a huge safety thing. I think. Like
Right.
The what?
Labs.
The labs
science
could be a
labs.
safety thing.
Yeah,
Is it a bigger one than the roof's leaking?
well, no, but,
But we still have, but my point being, we still have to do many of the repairs that are in that $20 million. So how do we do that? If we get the 70 approved and we get the building built, which again, clearly, which this is not a surprise, right? The public, everybody has said we want the one building for years and years, right? It would absolutely be the thing to do. However, if we get that done, how do we get the other things done?
Yeah, and I think, again, just to make clear, we will make recommendations based on just the data we see from the community. You all are the leaders of the district, you know what needs to get done. So the next step is combining those things together for what's that plan moving forward. And that certainly, we only play a small part in that process. But you're making a very valid point. I think the only thing I'll say in the data is just it's unique that I've seen here that I haven't seen in many other districts, that if you wanted a referendum that would succeed, usually with districts, I'm saying you have to give them this, like a new building, plus they need to see this in all these other schools. That's usually the case. It's pretty rare that we've seen it. I think only once or twice else? Have we seen a situation where the community says, you know what, we recognize that is so unfair that if you get that done, we'll be okay if you don't do the rest? I'm not saying you all as leaders of the district would accept that. I just want you to know the data certainly says this is such a high priority for the public that they would sacrifice other things if it were to give them this thing.
But what can be sacrificed?
That's a fair
What's
point.
even possible to be sacrificed for that? I think that's my struggle, is what's even possible to be sacrificed for that? What are we gonna have to do with our bonding, with our debt load, right? And all of those pieces to solve some things that are pretty expensive, which I think we'll probably need to talk about pretty deeply at the next meeting.
And again, if you guys come and say, listen, it just isn't possible for our district, we're gonna need that higher number, that's where we say, let's kick in the educational program, and let's work that through. And again, we can't predict when that would result in the final step of the process being a referendum. But again, that's where you guys, as the leaders of the district, you've been elected for a reason. So if that's the feedback you give us, we will absolutely put that plan in place.
Voice in the sky again. So there really wasn't a question as far as from the community. We didn't really question about timing, correct? Timing to that we would go for a referendum.
Right, and none of this did we give, did the public give feedback on when they wanted this to be done? Is that answering your question?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, correct. Yes, we didn't test the timing of it. In terms of, would you like to see this done in this November or in April or in March? That's not something we tend to test, just because it gets overly political.
And do we have any updated information on costs? Come on down.
With regards to cost, I guess some facts. Last 19 bid openings that we've had, so mostly additions with a small renovation piece, in the last 12 months have ranged from anywhere from $674 a square foot, all in, north of $1,000 a square foot. Now granted, those are much smaller square foot floor plans than what we have here with the new school. So there's going to be economies of scale, things of that nature. So happen to be going at the same time. We have two new schools that just ran through the design course. We established final control estimates for both of those new schools. They're currently out to bid right now. Both bid openings are next week. So we're anticipating really competitive bidding, and we're going to use this bid opening, look at the bids, test the current market, see where it's at. The final control estimate on both of those schools was just south of $600 a square foot. So this is 300,000 square feet of new building, new sites. There's an abatement and demolition piece as well to it. So it's an extremely comparable scope of work to what we're looking at here. And that was just under 600 a square foot.
What was the square footage total, you said?
300,000 square feet between the two schools. So here we have 93,000 square feet. And again, we were just south of 600 a square foot. That was based on 7-8 months of design work, multiple budget checks, very detailed cost assessments. But putting all that aside, it's the bid opening. So we have two of them next week, August 6th and August 9th.
Will we potentially have any of that cost information from the August 13th meeting?
Absolutely, we'll have it next week. So I'm anxious to see, we know what the last 19 additions came in per the bid openings. We'll know what two new schools come in next week, and we'll find a reasonable range between them. So certainly I don't think we'll have the economies of scale that we'll have with the 300,000 square feet, but it's an extremely comparable situation, so.
Thank you.
It's a great opportunity to have.
The voice
Sorry,
in the
me
sky.
again. I'll be that person. Like I just need help translating that to what does that mean for us and for our community. Like we've been talking about small, medium, high, as far as our ask of the public for funding. So I don't know if someone can help with math, or I can do it here.
So right now we're at 93, just north of 93,000 square feet of building. At $660 a square foot is 62 million. At 600, it's 56 million. Okay?
And that's based
Big differential. So, again, these additions in Reno, anywhere from 674 to 1,000. You'll have economies of scale in relationship to those. Based on what I know through final control estimates on the 2 new schools that are currently out to bid, that's just under 600. So I think it's reasonable to say where we're at now, again, design has not commenced. This is purely high-level preliminary baseline budget assessments we're doing based on square footage. We have soils we have to figure out. We have stormwater management we have to figure out. We have to go through all the different authorities that have jurisdiction that have to ultimately permit the work. There's so many obstacles that we need to go through that have potential cost impacts. We need to start at a reasonably conservative value.
Right.
We just have to.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to seeing where the bids come in next week. Now, that's a very basic design. There's a number of components that we'll have here that those projects don't have. I'll take all of this into consideration. I think we should have a slightly greater value from what we see next week because we don't have the footage, and there are some components that we're going to have, such as a playground, such as some play surfacing outside that those schools don't have.
I was just building on taking what we're talking about and making it accessible or whatever, understandable to anyone listening or watching tonight. What I just heard you say, and if I'm putting words in your mouth, you tell me or slap me, do whatever you want. There's no universe in which a new building that's 93,000 square feet is going to be less than $50 million. That's what I think I just heard you say. Does that sound right?
I would say that's accurate, yes.
There's no universe where that happens. And it could be as much as 75 million. Does that sound right?
Again, there's a huge level of design.
Sure.
There's basic and
85 million.
schools can be 700-800 a square foot.
Just trying to give us a range that we can operate within. It's not going to be less than 50 or 55 million.
No,
Probably not going to be more than 85 million. He's not biting on that one.
Well, because they can't start actual construction for a couple years.
No, I get it.
Inflation
I'm
on
just
that,
saying,
too.
I'm just trying to give us some context
Yeah.
so that people understand what we're talking about. That's all. Thanks.
Does that square footage include furnishing the building?
This value?
Yeah.
No. The current projects that are out, just under 600 square foot, yeah. There's furniture is in a separate funding mechanism that does not include furniture.
I think I'm stating the obvious, but those bids are very important for us in this process.
Yeah.
And we'll have that information next week, because the swing, even a $100 swing, when you're talking about that's $9 million difference.
And typically, as I mentioned earlier, starting out reasonably conservative. Again, design has not started. Nothing has started. We're purely talking high level. Start reasonably conservative, and as the design's progressing, we're refining the budget. So as we get through those different obstacles, we reasonably reduce certain values. So once we get through soils, okay, soils checked out, okay, we could take some of the conservativeness out of our excavation number and all of that. Okay, next thing you know, we got through stormwater reviews. Okay, we don't need to do an underground storm trap. So as we go through all these different checkpoints, the numbers being refined. That's the recommended progression. We don't want to start with a best case scenario if everything goes perfect. Because if it doesn't, we're going to be coming back up here saying, oh, we just went up 1.2 million. We just went up 3 million. That's not the right way to do it, so.
We don't want you to do that way either.
No, that's not. So.
And thank you, because I think you spoke to that when we were interviewing for help with our construction plan, so thank you for that.
So next week's a big week.
Oh,
But at the current square footage of 93,000, at 600 a square foot, that's $56 million. give you an idea sort of where things are at.
Yep.
Okay.
It's a lot to take in.
It's a lot. I'd love to say that I'm surprised, but
No.
I'm not. It's a tough decision, and frankly, it should be a tough decision. It should be a hard decision. We don't take any of these decisions lightly.
If it was an easy decision, the previous board may have handled it before now,
Yes.
so.
Whitney, any questions? I think
Processing.
Ange.
Same thing. It's a lot to take in.
Yeah. But it makes sense though, so.
Can anybody think of anything that they would need from our teams prior to the committee meeting on the 13th? Outside of
Yeah, the shared.
the money talk,
Yeah.
and outside of that.
I guess what would be helpful, I guess, as a board is someone to clarify. What decision is being made on the next board meeting? And that may help our committee meeting also, that the general public can attend and also ask more questions or make, statements kind of thing.
Yeah, I can speak to that if that's helpful. So the board meeting, you said is the 13th?
Yes.
So that's right before the deadline for if you wanted to put something on the ballot, the board would need to vote. So if you do want to move forward for the November ballot, you will have to vote on actual ballot language at that meeting. And so we'll have to have that prepared. So if you do decide to move forward, you'll be able to vote for that at your next meeting.
There's no other option than that?
And you can hold a special meeting because you have until the 17th? You have until the 19th, so you could hold a special meeting after that 13th, but the deadline of the 19th is hard and fast.
August 19th.
August 19th, yeah.
And what are we saying? Like, I want to say explicitly what we're making a decision on. We're talking about amount.
So it would be,
What we're asking for.
I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. It would be voting on the actual resolution and the actual ballot language that would go on the ballot. So that includes the amount, it includes what we would say in terms of what's being done, the projects, all of that. If you did want to go forward in November, would have to be voted on at a public board meeting by the 19th, August 19th.
So would it include, that makes sense, the amount, what we're doing, would we have to define where we're doing it as well? It's gonna go on the ballot in November?
When you say where?
9.
Physical
No,
space.
physical space, like, are we building on Manning, on Miller? or
I
any
don't think that
location?
needs to go on
Yeah,
language.
that wouldn't be in the language, so that would be okay. But you do say if you're building new versus renovating, that is part of that, so I do think that's a decision that would have to be made. Plus, that's gonna drive your costs, so I think either way, that decision would get made.
And to confirm, $1 amount, correct?
As opposed to different options?
Correct.
Yeah, it would be a single dollar amount.
On the agenda.
So
Going into the meeting on the 13th.
certainly what we can do is have options prepared. You have to walk out of that meeting with something you have voted on, but we could have a couple different questions if that's the direction we're given, just so you have some options to vote on at that board meeting. Or you choose to not vote on anything, which means we're now looking towards a future election.
Yeah, because we have to have that board meeting agenda posted the Friday before, which means that any potential questions have to be posted by that Friday before, not really the 13th. So we could have multiple questions on there. We could have a language about, put a ballot measure for this much, yes or no, put a ballot measure for this much, yes or no?
And just to be clear, because I know what you meant, but just for anybody who
Yeah,
might be
please.
watching or listening, you mean to have it available for the board to vote on, not to
Yes.
actually be on the ballot?
Yes.
You don't have to choose one to put on the ballot, but you can have multiple options available to you and the board at that meeting to be able to choose
On the
between.
agenda, so we
Correct.
can put that on the agenda, and so we could potentially put all 3 funding options. We could potentially put ballot language for all 3 funding options on the August 13th agenda as 3 separate voting items.
That sounds accurate to me, and that your staff is also shaking their head, so I feel comfortable saying yes.
Because depending on what happens and the
Yes.
the information we get in the board's further discussion, then you have the flexibility to choose from 3 options. But Yes,
You can't approve more than one, though.
but can't approve more than one.
Yes.
Be on the ballot.
So the cadence, right, the cadence that we have been doing throughout this entire process, which has worked really well, is we've taken all of the information in, we have had a discussion evening, and then at the next board meeting, we've had a committee meeting prior to that board meeting to discuss it. So we're trying to keep that same cadence without creating another meeting that frankly is gonna be super hard for all of us to get to. So at the committee meeting, prior to the 13th board meeting, again, starts at 5:30, board meeting starts at 6:30. At that committee meeting, we'll have to decide which of that ballot language, or talk about the ballot language, and have a decision amongst in your heart, right, what you're going to go to vote for on that night.
And then would need to decide when, which election?
Well, so so
We would decide.
we will have 4 options, November, yes or no. And then
And then funding
If
level?
yes,
and then funding
yeah.
Okay.
level. Yes.
Yeah,
If we
it's-
were
it's-
to,
the no
if we were to
means-
vote on no for all 3 of them, we're saying not November.
Yeah.
Right.
So you don't have to choose now if you're looking at 25, 2026, that's a later decision.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, so the vote would specifically be for the ballot language on in November if we decide to go that way. Okay. Jack, you wanted to challenge something?
No, I want to start first and foremost by saying, I know it's a priority for this board on this issue to be unbelievably transparent. And I think any fair assessment of that would conclude that the board was unbelievably transparent on this issue. And I'll throw our admin team in there too. We really wanted to hear from the community what they really thought. And it was my great joy and privilege to lead all those meetings. And I loved it. And I learned a lot. And I loved the partnership we had between the board and the community and our excellent partners. We chose very well. They were all in attendance at all the meetings. But I just want for the record to be said, first of all, the transparency here, I don't know how anybody who is being a fair assessor of that could say that we're not assessing, we're not transparent. We were there for hours, there were multiple opportunities, and we answered every single question that was asked of us. So the transparency issue is important in any district, and that speaks to trust, but it's really important that the word is out there that the board is completely committed to that, and this process has been completely transparent. And we're not done yet, but to this point, I think that's so important to say. The second is, there were some questions about spending money on a consultant for this issue. There is no way that we could have got this quality of feedback from the community without Sullivan and without hiring a consultant. And we didn't use all the money that we had budgeted, not even close, but I think Sullivan did a very thorough job. It's apparent in these reports and in the process that they had. And they were excellent partners. So I think that's really important, and we're grateful for that. We got what we paid for. If we're gonna be transparent and we really care about what the community says, we have to get the community input. And I feel much more confident that we have a better idea about what the community wants than before we started this process. And there's no substitute for that. So you gotta pay for quality. You have to pay to get what you want, which is transparency and community input. So that was very imperative. With that being said, great attendance from the community members. And that one Saturday, we thought, like, why are we getting up? I don't mind, but there was an overflow crowd there. And we got a lot of feedback from many people, and that was beautiful. So it actually, in the quality, I have to say to our community, I love this community, but the quality that we got from this process, and in my opinion, we're still in phase 2, right? We haven't even begun to talk about, fighting about what we really, really need. We were trying to take input. But we learned, I'll just speak for myself, and I think others too, we learned a lot from our community. And they came up with ideas sometimes that we weren't thinking about. They sharpened our thinking. It was a truly beautiful collaborative process, which is what democracy is supposed to be. Citizens speaking up, some we agree with, some we don't agree with. We don't agree with each other. That's the nature of the thing. but we got some great input, things to be cautious about, new ideas that we had not brought to the table. It was truly great collaborative democracy in action. So, and I'm grateful to all of our partners, to Leggett, Nicholas, and to Sullivan they were at every meeting, represented, it was beautiful. With all that being said, your original analysis, Colin, you said of the 10 different items, there's good favorability for 8 of them. I want to say that I get the point, and I do know our community, having been here for a dozen years. I don't know that like science labs, which got a pretty favorable rating, are a shiny object. That speaks directly to the learning process, and they're 50 years old and aging, and they're some of the worst science labs that I've seen in a high school. So I just want to be clear that there's agreement, but even within the data that we see, for 8 of the 10 designated projects, there was strong favorability. So with all appreciation and respect for your analysis, which I think was excellent, quite frankly, I don't know if the board decides to wait until April that things like the science labs, as an example, or other issues are shiny objects, you know what I'm saying? So, and that's what I want to say. I thought that those are imperative to this project.
So I would say, first of all, thank you. And when I use the term shiny objects, it was probably not the right term because it does give the wrong impression to people who maybe don't know what we're talking about. So what I should say is educational benefits versus shiny objects. Because everything you're looking at, even as we've heard from your construction team, your architects, we're not looking at the most modern or these ornate buildings. You guys are within being reasonable and responsible and fitting within the shades of the community on the types of things you're looking at to do and to build. So shiny objects could certainly give the wrong impression on that.
I'm not trying to be nitpicky.
No, I think it's important to clarify. So the point, I think, if I word it better, would simply be that the community wants the basics of the infrastructure. They would also love to see, to your point, science labs for sure is a need. I mean, heck, they even said they'd love to see investments in athletics. So there were certainly areas they'd love to see even beyond nuts and bolts. And so you're absolutely accurate in that. It's simply, if we look to it, let's say possibly an April election, that's where people are looking less for educational benefits and they're looking more for safety, security, infrastructure. And so if I word it better, that's the point that I would make, is that your November electorate, they are more interested in not just infrastructure, but also educational benefits. How does this help curriculum? How does this help kids? How does this further, how we can perform as a district? When you typically look at April electorates, because they tend to be older voters and they're not as worried about educational benefits, they want to know, are the buildings that I pay property taxes for, are they being maintained or are they safe? And so that's the concern I have about looking to April, is sometimes you can see those educational benefits perform a little bit less well than they would at a November election. So I hope I worded it better there, because you're right, nothing here is a shiny object. Maybe the pool is the only shiny object, and obviously you already said before this process started, we ain't building a new pool. So you already knew where we stood, where the community was on that one. Everything else here is reasonable, and you're looking at, again, that's why 8 out of 10 got favorable feedback back.
Thank you again. I want my main message to be a thank you to our community, to our board, and to our partners. It really was an invigorating process, and we're not done, but it's been great so far. I think that needs to be said.
I want to say thank you to you, Jack. The one I went to, I thought you did exceptional explaining to the people that were there. So you did an excellent job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Colin, will you be at that committee meeting at 5:30 on the 13th?
I have to look at my boss. Give me a second.
We have the crew.
For sure, one of us will be here. Let me just check to see if it will be me specifically.
And that goes out to the crew.
Everybody?
If they're going to be our Leggett and Nicholas, will you guys be there?
Yes. Yep. Yes.
And we're looking at my calendar. It does look like I will be the one here as well for that meeting. If it's not me, it will be Ed Sullivan, my business partner, who's the owner of the company, so you will have good representation either way.
Okay.
Last thing just came. Say we decide to go to ballot November and it fails. can we educate and go back to ballot in April?
Yes.
Okay.
Do we have to lower the number, or is that just the norm?
It just means you certainly couldn't go higher.
Right.
And then if costs go up, you might end up having to shave, because now you will have to relook at the cost just to verify everything still is possible within those numbers. So it's the risk that maybe you have to go down. Really, the answer to that will be, I hate talking in the negative, but if you were to lose, by how much would then determine, do we have to cut it down? If you lose by a couple points, you probably don't need to shave it down. If you lose by 20 or 30, now we have to talk about it. So it really is, again, I don't want to be talking about a loss. I want to go forward and win big. And that's our record, by the way, so we want to do that for you as well here. But to answer the question, if you do need to look towards the April election, it's not a guarantee you do need to reduce, but the November election will tell us, do we need to reduce?
Do you have any districts that have done that?
Where they've gone, yeah, we have districts that have gone multiple times. Here's the good news, usually they do it because they, this would sound very self-serving, I'm sorry, but they don't hire us, they lose, and then they hire us, and then they win. We haven't had it where we have to go multiple times ourselves like that. But the good news is the public will engage with you more. They will certainly, because now they know for sure this is an issue because they just saw it on their ballots. So you do have lots more opportunities for engagement after a potential November election. But again, we're always shooting for a big win. We don't want to get you at 51-49, so when I caution you where the numbers might need to be in order to be in a good spot, that's not me telling you how to get to 50% plus one vote. That's how to say how we have a good, solid win. So we want to give you really, really favorable odds when you move forward. So I'm always, just like with architects and construction teams, we're building a cushion in, it's the same here. So when I say you've got a really good chance in November, it's because you do have a really good chance in November.
Do you ever see one of these efforts? Go ahead, Adina, please.
It's something I'm grappling with now, and I didn't want to wait until the 13th to ask. I'm just trying to understand what your feedback was on what the community is finding favorable. Are they finding it favorable right now on renovations and additions? Or like, how did you state that? Or I don't know. I don't know if I was wrong in saying that. Or is it equal or tied with the new school and renovations? Like what were you saying we're at now?
Yeah, the feedback for all three infrastructure solutions was overall positive. However, there is a clear sign in the data, plus just what people told us at the various meetings, that they didn't love the middle option of doing an addition. If you're going to spend that much money, what we heard a lot was, why don't we just go for new? And so when you ask about the three sort of renovations versus addition versus new school, there was certainly more support for either do it and do it all, or do just the renovations and let's make the cost as reasonable as possible. The middle ground wasn't overall as favorable.
Well, I want to say this. We put those original numbers together and we got the feedback. So we learned through this process. And tell me if this jives with your analysis of the feedback from the community. It's pretty clear that people want a new building. I mean, that's a pretty strong consensus. But they also would want renovations. But we originally thought that maybe the new building would not be as expensive and we don't even know the number yet. But my reading, and if you have a different reading, then please say this, is that there is no consensus in this world today, right? I mean, there were 20% of the people roughly who wanted 90 million, there was 20% who wanted 70, there was 20% who wanted 55, and there was 40% who said no money, right?
I would change those numbers a little bit, but the concept you're making is accurate.
All right, so add 2 or 3% on either end.
You only had 21, I think it was, that said no money, so I just would clarify that point. Make sure I give you the right number.
I see 21.
Yeah, 21% said no additional funding. So you had 28, 22, 22, because there's also the unknown or unsure on the bottom of it's a 7%. I only want to point it out because 21% is obviously, for those who say no, is a lower.
When we look at the $90 million funding option, what do we see? What percentage are saying yes to that? The high option?
Oh, I see what you're looking
22.
21 said strong, 11
No,
said
let me grab
somewhat.
that.
46 said strongly opposed. Is that what you're looking at, Jack?
Mm-hmm. No funding. But, yeah.
So when you say, so that would be the support levels?
On the, under the rank,
Versus the
or?
Yeah, so I'm looking at rank, and he's looking at the support levels, which is what I want to clarify for
Yeah.
everybody. So the rank is the one I would point to even more than that, because the support versus oppose, those are the individual opinions on each individual of those options.
Okay, so the one thing that we learned through this process was that people are pretty supportive of a K-5 building, a new one, right? Overall, that was a consensus.
Correct.
So when we originally put the numbers together, because we learned through this process, which we should have, the $55 million was the renovation. The 70 was a significant renovation with the hope that maybe we could do a K-5 building, but now that has emerged as something that people want.
Correct.
So, but to do the renovations that I think people aren't supportive based on this data analysis would mean a new building plus certain renovations.
Correct.
Which is slightly higher than the $70 million.
Correct. And just to make sure we're clear, when we say that 70 number, again, that's for us putting you in the best possible position. It's all about percentages, right? It's all about risks. And so if you came in at that 70, that's where we feel the most comfortable. It doesn't mean you couldn't go for more than that 70. It's just, again, each million you add reduces the odds of it being successful, but it doesn't mean you go 70.1 and now you just lost. This is all about scales, and we just want to put you in the best spot. But we understand the realities of what your experts are going to tell you, what you know you need. And so again, that work over the next couple of weeks is going to be important to figure out what can we get done in the most reasonable position. And if that is over that 70 number, that's just the reality of what your district needs, and it'll be our job to go out and give you the best chances at that number then.
So I think to that point, that's what I would like to understand. The new building is a big number, it's just a big number, right? But I would like to understand what work we have no choice on that's outside of the new building, and what potential, and maybe that is the square footage calculation for those pieces, because we have the want to haves, and we also have the need to haves from the safety and security angle, which we have no choice on. So understanding what those have no choice on, I think is really important for this conversation, right? It just because, like, what does that even bring us up to? Does that bring us up to 70 million, or does that bring us up to 80 million? Because if it brings us up to 80 million,
That is the important question.
that is a how are we bonding for that?
And
right?
But the bid opening will have a swing of potentially $10 million. So,
But not up to 70, or, well, it could go up to 70, but even if it's at 60, let's say we have $10 million to kind of, those safety and security things.
I want to make one point and then my final question. One is, these numbers represent input without any kind of promotion on our behalf.
Or real context.
Yes, exactly. So the support is without us making a push and an argument, because our point was we wanted to hear from everybody, and that's what we did. We were transparent, we wanted public opinion, and not biased by our biases. So we never made the hard argument for some of the other items. We know something has to be done, but we didn't make the hard argument for why some of these things had to be done. So these numbers come in fairly pure without a push. Have you ever seen, or how necessary is a community committee that is out there canvassing and going door to door? Is that essential to this kind of a project?
Correct, yes, that is essential, no matter where.
Essential.
Yes, no matter where you end up in terms of if you put something on the ballot, that committee will need to do what it does, obviously separate from the district and separate from district public funds. The thing I would say is the higher the number is, the higher the ask is, simply the more you have to work then to get that passed. And so you think about that balance of, if the reality is the numbers come in and they do go higher than what you'd like, then the question is, do you have the capacity to, the board will need to be out there as representatives of the district explaining to the voters. You can, obviously the administration's a little bit more locked on what they can do, but you'll need to be out there for sure explaining to the public why this is a need, what the value is. And so if you think about wherever that number falls, the higher it is, the more we're going to have to work to make sure that it does end up with a favorable outcome.
Anybody else needs for our next meeting? What do you need, if there's anything outside of just more clarity on the cost, which obviously we're going to get, some clarity around the cost of these non-negotiable projects, which we can get.
We'll have the cost of the bids.
Yep, we're gonna have that. So what else do you guys need to have a effective discussion on the 13th?
I think those are all good starters.
So would the wording be specifically, okay, we're gonna build a new school and we'll remodel this, this, and this? Or is it a little more general, new school and then renovations?
So there is a specific structure by law you have to fit within. So a certain portion of this is just going to be locked. Your bound counsel is who we would work with, including the district and anyone else, to formulate these questions. So a portion of it is just, this is what it has to say. Within that, you do have some flexibility. It could be, you could have less detail in there, you could have more detail in there. We tend to want to provide more detail in the question, and I do think that does reflect your district being more transparent and putting the details on the ballot. You do have the option to be pretty limited in what you put on there, but we have seen it does have an impact at success when the public can go and see what it is they're voting on and what they're getting for that. It does improve your odds of success. And so when we recommend that ballot language, it will have some more of those specifics listed within it.
Okay, thanks.
Can you give us an example?
Of like what a question would sound like? Or? So the legalese language is shall the board equip, alter, there's a lot of additional words they add in there. Construct, additions to, and there's about 30 to 40 words in there that's just locked by statute. Within that, then you can say things like build a new elementary school for these students. You can say construct new classrooms or remodel classrooms. You can say things like improve safety and security by doing X, Y, and Z. If you look at the menu that we had created to drive this phase 2 process, there are going to be keywords out of that we can put within it. But you combine us with the bond counsel because they're going to say you can't say these 7 words, but you can say these 2 words. It is a little bit of a back and forth when it comes to that. But that middle, you can get into specifics about the types of projects that are being addressed and if there's new construction and you just can't get into sort of the benefits language of this will allow us to do more in our curriculum. That stuff can't be done. But the nuts and bolts, we can say science labs, we can say athletic facilities, gyms, whatever it might be, that can all be specified within that. And then it ends with an issue said bonds in the amount of, and then the dollar amount. That's the end of the question.
Got it. Thank you.
Colin, can you also, I think in the very beginning, you talked about the different phases that we would go in. Let me ask this first. Once we decide where we're going, if it's November, does that move to phase 3?
Good question. So the way that we have this program set up is, as Jack mentioned, or sorry, Dr. Balderman mentioned, we're at the end of phase 2. If you all decide to move quickly and speed up and go for November, we would jump right to phase 4. If you all decide we're going to slow down and not look to November, that's when, yes, we would then move into phase 3 and continue working with the community to figure out where that sweet spot might be in a plan. So the decision you all make in 2 weeks' time would decide, do we go straight to phase 4 or do we engage phase 3 of this process?
And so my question is, more information needed. Could you, I don't know if you can post it or review this. For the board, we would potentially have it before the 13th, but I'm looking for a review on what the timeline looks like in either situation. What does our timeline look like? What's happening in phase 4? Are we meeting more? What do we have to set up? What do we have to do in that phase? And what's our time? What does our time frame look like? And then we can also review the other option, I guess, if we're not going in November.
Okay, yeah, we can absolutely make sure we come equipped with that at the meeting in 2 weeks.
And possibly for the board. And the reason I ask is because I want to know what are we getting ourselves into as far as what work are we doing in 2 months and what work are we doing in 5 months, that type of thing. So I know you reviewed a lot of this and maybe at the very beginning to the board of what we had to do, what the time frame and the phases look like. I just want to review that.
Okay, yeah, we can definitely work with the district to make sure we have all that pulled together and provide it to the board for your next meeting.
Awesome. Okay, and we're gonna post the information, the survey information, yes?
Yes.
In board docs and on the website?
And on the website.
As of
So the whole
tomorrow?
world can see this.
As of tomorrow morning?
Tomorrow.
Talk about
Beautiful.
transparency.
Yeah. Okay,
Everything
Give them
shared
the
tonight will be
submission,
posted on the
final
website
submission
and
version.
board docs.
wonderful.
Just making sure we provided everything that was ready for that.
Last chance, guys. Okay, I'm gonna close the discussion then. Thank you. We appreciate all of you deeply.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Great partnership.
Okay, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, all in favor, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okey dokey, board meeting on 8/1 closed.